Let's return now to our top story. The energy regulator approving a tariff hike worth nearly 10%. Reaction now from economist Dr. Azar Jammine from Econometrix. Welcome, Dr. Jammine, and good evening to you. I suppose it could have been a lot worse. It could have been the full 16.6%. Do we have anything to be grateful for tonight?
I think we can be very grateful that NERSA certainly held back and that the tariff increase this year will be lower, ironically, than last year's increase of 12.7%.
What would a full 16.6 have actually meant?
A full 16.6% would have obviously meant an increase in the inflation rate of around 0.2% over and above what it might otherwise have been. In other words, a reduction in the disposable income of the average consumer of 20 Rand in every 1,000 that he had.
Perhaps a little speculative, but do you think NERSA made the decision because it wanted to send out a strong message to Eskom, or perhaps it has the best interests of the consumer at heart?
I think it does have the interests of the consumer at heart. There were 8,000 representations against, well, most of them against the Eskom application. One must also realize that we're going into local government elections, although I would like to think that that did not affect NERSA's decision.
Having said that, Azar, I mean, it's still going to hit the consumer hard. I mean, we're still dealing with almost 10% here. So, you know, while we should be grateful, the fact is it is still inflationary, surely.
Make no mistake, it is going to hit consumers hard. It will not cause the actual inflation rate to rise any further, because in the base is a 12.7% tariff hike for last year. But you've got to also realize that electricity tariffs currently are not in any way very high by international standards. Part of the problem is historical. The fact that we kept electricity tariff increases way below the inflation rate for 25 years. And so there's a catch-up taking place little by little.
Having said that, though, companies themselves, goods, services, are not going to hold on to the increase. They will pass this on to the consumer. And that, in effect, could be the final straw that breaks this proverbial camel's back.
The fear is of a knock-on effect, but the experience, certainly in the wake of the Rand's sharp depreciation, is that economic conditions are so weak at the moment that businesses are finding it very hard to pass on cost increases the way that would have been the case.
Well, in other words, they have their own survival to think of.
They have their own survival to think of. They want to keep their clients, and so they're reluctant necessarily to pass on those cost increases.
They might not do that, but it certainly then has an impact on labour. I mean, they will cut back where they can.
Absolutely, they would then have to cut back on labour and other costs.
Eskom warning tonight of operational consequences. I think possibly that's a code of saying watch out for more load shedding. Should that happen, again, through the back door, there's also a negative impact on the economy if that happens.
Of course there can be a negative impact, because further down the line, if the economy should pick up momentum and electricity demand starts picking up, we are in trouble. When they say operational problems, then they are talking about the fact that many of our power stations, most of them are very old and needing enormous amounts of maintenance. And if Eskom can't actually see to this maintenance, then there's an increased chance of outages that would lead to load shedding.
Just finally, Dr. I mean, it's on one side of town you have NERSA making this decision. On the other side of town you have Barclays deciding to disinvest from South Africa, selling its majority stake in Absa. What kind of signal do both of these things send out to investors tonight?
Well, investors are obviously aware that South Africa is experiencing economic problems. We had the GDP growth figures earlier today at 0.6%. That's not exciting. But having said that, all I can say is that there are some countries, our peers, such as Brazil, Russia, Argentina, Venezuela, who are having it even more harder than we are.
Always looking for the optimistic side. Do you think, just very quickly, that Barclays' decision could have an impact on other international companies and their strategy within South Africa and Africa? In other words, well, if they're doing it, possibly there's a gap for us to disinvest as well.
I'm not at all convinced that Barclays is not just a unique situation of a company that has decided on a particular strategic direction that is not shared by other companies.
But it's not necessarily a direct vote of no confidence in this country.
No, I think there are strategic issues involved with the fall in commodity prices more generally, the fact that Basel III requires certain returns and that to capital, and Africa's just not meeting those at the moment.
Dr. Azar Jammine from Econometrix, thank you very much indeed, exploring the impact of today's tariff decision by the energy regulator, NERSA.